Hello, everyone, and welcome back to English with Lisaa. I'm Lisaa, and I'm really happy you're here today. In this episode, you will listen to a suspenseful English story told in a slow and simple way, so you can relax and enjoy learning. This story is designed especially for English learners who want to improve their listening skills and understand English naturally. As you listen, don't worry about understanding every word. Just focus on the story, the feelings, and the flow of the language. You can always listen again and learn more each time. At the end of the story, I will explain some important vocabulary, grammar, and phrasal verbs from the story. This will help you understand English better and use it in your own sentences. So take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let's begin today's story together. It was late at night, and a man named John was sitting alone in his room looking at his phone again and again because he could not sleep and his mind felt tired. He softly said to himself, "I don't know why, but something feels strange tonight." Suddenly, his phone buzzed, and John looked at the screen with surprise because a new message had appeared with tomorrow's date. He frowned and said, "That's strange. This doesn't make sense." John checked the phone again, but nothing changed, and the message stayed exactly the same. The message was short and simple. It said, "Do not take the 8 a.m. bus." John felt confused and whispered, "Why would someone send me this?" He tried to reply, but the message did not go through, and the number had no name. John leaned back and said quietly, "Let me think for a moment." All night, John kept thinking about the message, and he told himself, "Maybe I should be careful." The next morning, John reached the bus stop and saw the familiar 8 a.m. bus arrive. His heart started beating faster, and he said under his breath, "I have a bad feeling about this." People were getting on the bus, and John stood there, unsure, thinking, should I take the risk or should I wait? After a few seconds, he stepped back and said, "I think I'll wait." A few minutes later, loud sirens filled the street and people began to talk because the bus had been in a serious accident. John sat down slowly and said, "Oh no, that could have been me." He took a deep breath and whispered, "Now I understand." That evening, another message appeared on his phone, again with a future date. The message said, "This is only the beginning." John looked at the phone and said softly, "This changes everything." That night, John lay on his bed staring at the ceiling because his mind would not slow down. He said softly to himself, "I can't stop thinking about this." Every small sound in the room made him alert, and he kept checking his phone, thinking, what if another message comes? Around midnight, his phone vibrated, and John sat up quickly, whispering, "Here we go again." A new message appeared, and once again, the date was from the future. John read the message slowly and said, "Oh no, this doesn't sound good." The message said, "Tomorrow, someone close to you will be in danger." John felt his chest tighten and said, "Someone close to me? What does that mean?" He tried to reply, but there was no answer, and he said, "This is really worrying." John began thinking about the people he loved and whispered, "I hope everyone is safe." The next morning, John called his sister and tried to sound calm, saying, "Everything is fine, right?" She laughed and said there was nothing to worry about, but John thought, "I'm still not convinced." He then messaged his best friend, but when there was no reply, John said, "That's not like him." At work, John could not focus and kept telling himself, stay calm, stay focused. In the afternoon, another message arrived, and John said quietly, I was afraid of this. The message was short and cold. It said, you cannot save everyone. John swallowed hard and said, that hurts to read. He typed quickly, tell me what to do, but the message failed, and he said, I feel helpless. That evening, John's phone rang, and when he heard his sister's shaking voice, he whispered, please don't say it. She told him that his best friend had been in an accident earlier that day. John closed his eyes and said, I didn't want this to be true. He sat in silence and finally said, some things are beyond our control. As he placed the phone down, another message appeared on his phone, saying, the hardest lesson is next. John took a deep breath and said, I don't know what's coming, but I have to be ready. The next morning, John woke up earlier than usual, even before his alarm rang, because his mind was already awake and full of thoughts. He sat on the edge of his bed and said softly, today is the day. His phone lay on the table, quiet and still, and John looked at it as if it were alive. He took a deep breath and said, whatever happens, I need to know the truth. As he stepped outside, the morning felt strangely calm, and John noticed that everything looked sharper and clearer than before. While walking down the street, John suddenly stopped and said, this feels familiar. He realized that he had seen this exact morning before, not in a dream, but in a memory he could not fully understand. John's phone buzzed, and this time, instead of a message, a location appeared on the screen. He frowned and said, so this is where it leads. Without fully knowing why, John followed the location, feeling nervous but also determined. The place was an old building on the edge of the city, quiet and almost forgotten. John stood in front of it and whispered, why here? Inside, the building was empty and cold, and his footsteps echoed as he walked slowly forward. Suddenly, a screen turned on, and John stepped back slightly, saying, this is unreal. A video began to play, and John froze because the person on the screen was himself, but older and more tired. He stared in disbelief and said, That's me. The older John on the screen began to speak, explaining that years ago he made a decision that destroyed many lives, including his own. The older John explained that he lost someone he loved because he ignored his instincts and chose comfort over courage. John listened silently, his heart heavy, and whispered, so this is my future. The video continued, explaining that after years of regret, the older John found a way to send messages back in time, not to change everything, but to change himself. John slowly nodded and said, so you're trying to save me from becoming you. The older John looked directly into the camera and said that not every tragedy can be stopped, but every lesson can be learned earlier. John felt tears in his eyes and said, I didn't understand before, but now I do. The video explained that the bus accident was not the real danger, but the pattern of ignoring small warnings in life. John finally understood that the messages were training him to listen, to pause, and to choose differently. He whispered, this was never about fear. It was about awareness. The screen went dark, and one final message appeared on John's phone. It said, if you are watching this, it means you chose to listen. John closed his eyes and said, thank you for giving me another chance. As he walked out of the building, the city felt the same, but John felt different. He smiled slightly and said, the future is not written. it's practiced. For the first time in days, John placed his phone in his pocket without fear. He took a deep breath and walked forward, knowing that the messages would stop, but the lessons would stay with him forever. Now, let me continue by giving you some clear examples and useful words so everything becomes easier to understand and remember. I will explain slowly, just like a teacher speaking gently. First, let's look again at the past simple tense with examples. We use the past simple when an action is finished and completed in the past. For example, John received a message, he read the message, and he decided to wait. All of these actions happened and ended in the past. In daily life, you might say, I opened the door, I answered the phone, or I missed the bus. These sentences are very common and they help us talk clearly about past events. Now, let's connect this with the past continuous tense and see how both tenses work together. The past continuous shows an action that was happening for some time in the past. For example, John was sitting in his room and he was thinking about the message. These actions were ongoing. When we combine both tenses, we can say something like, John was sitting quietly when his phone rang. Another example is, I was walking home when it started to rain. This structure is very natural in English and is often used in stories and real conversations. Now, let's focus on some important vocabulary words related to feelings because emotions help make your English sound real and expressive. The word confused means not understanding something clearly. For example, I felt confused when I read the instructions. The word restless means not able to relax or stay calm. For example, I felt restless all night and could not sleep. The word relieved means feeling calm after fear or worry. For example, I felt relieved when I reached home safely. Another useful word is determined, which means strongly decided. For example, she was determined to learn English every day. These are simple but powerful words that you can use in daily life. Now, let me explain phrasal verbs with clear examples, because phrasal verbs are very important in spoken English. The phrasal verb figure out means to understand something. For example, I tried to figure out the problem, or I can't figure out this message. The phrasal verb calm down means to relax and stop feeling nervous. For example, calm down and take a deep breath. The phrasal verb turn back means to return or change your decision. For example, he almost turned back, but then he continued. The phrasal verb carry on means to continue doing something. For example, she carried on working even when she was tired. Native speakers use these expressions all the time, so learning them will make your English sound more natural. Now, let's put everything together with a few natural sentences. You might hear or say sentences like, I was feeling confused, but I tried to calm down. Or, I was thinking about the problem when I finally figured it out. You can also say, I was tired, but I carried on because it was important. These sentences use grammar, vocabulary, and phrasal verbs together, just like real English. Remember, you don't need to learn everything at once. Listen, understand, and slowly start using these words and structures in your own sentences. English learning is a journey, and every small step matters. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope this story and explanation helped you feel more comfortable with English and enjoy learning in a calm way. Remember, you don't need to understand every word the first time. Take your time, listen again, and slowly your confidence will grow. If you enjoyed this episode, please like this video, share it with someone who is learning English, and subscribe to English with Lisaa for more stories, listening practice, and simple English lessons. Tell me in the comments how you felt about the story and which part you liked the most. I love reading your messages. Until next time, keep listening, keep learning, and be kind to yourself. This is Lisaa, and I'll see you again on English with Lisaa.